Hello, I'm Charlie Smith and I teach architecture at Liverpool John Moores University. This presentation discusses nurturing evaluative judgment by design students. Evaluative judgment is a skill that students need for a number of reasons, so that they can progress their work constructively during self-directed study time, so that they can critically discuss work with their peers, and so that, over time, they can become increasingly independent learners, students who are active producers in determining quality in their work, as opposed to being reliant on assessment by others. It's an equally important skill for students to develop in the context of design practice. Creative initiative and autonomy are valuable attributes, and graduates need to be able to self-monitor the quality of their work. They also need to be equipped with the necessary skills and understanding of what constitutes standards in their field. However, it is a capability that needs to be learned through experience. This presentation discusses two strategies for nourishing such judgment which have been trialled in the architecture programme at LJMU. Both of these are also relevant to other design-related programmes. The first is student peer review, and the second is using exemplar work as a medium through which to discuss standards and dimensions of quality. Central to fostering students' evaluative expertise is constructing feedback as a dialogic process which takes place in a generative learning environment, one in which feedback is repositioned as a feature of collectivist student engagement. Students need to be provided with opportunities to observe how their own judgments of work compare to those of others. One means through which to facilitate this is collaboratively reviewing the work of their peers. Several attributes of peer teaching are associated with nurturing evaluative judgment. It has been argued that peer evaluation is a cornerstone of professionalism, and that the process can facilitate subsequent employee evaluation skills. However, the approach is not without potential challenges. The latter point here could be particularly relevant in a studio environment, where there can be strong social bonds between students. Sadler proposes that students need experience of being involved in appraisal judgments which are as similar to those of their teachers as feasible. With that in mind, students working on their final project were invited to participate in peer reviews. The reviews were held in the design studio in a similar format to traditional reviews. Providing feedback to their peers will be a novel enough experience without complicating things further. Firstly, the participants were briefed on the nature of feedback to be provided, critically constructive and developmental. Each student presented their drawings and models to the peer group, who sat in a loose semicircle around them, and then gave verbal feedback to the presenting student. The tutor sat at the back throughout, acting purely as a facilitator and refraining from giving any feedback. The first session took place midway through the module, and a second 2 weeks later, so the participants had opportunity to reflect on the process and incorporate the feedback into their work. The reviews were evaluated using a questionnaire, which was issued to the participants after the second session. Analysing the participants' questionnaires, it was evident that the experience had facilitated their creative thinking and had led them to feeling able to make critical judgments about their colleagues' work. For example, as one participant commented, "I was confident that I had gained enough understanding that I felt capable of offering constructive critical comment." Research also suggests that peer review engages students in multiple acts of evaluation and critical judgment about both the other students' work and, in many different ways, about their own. In this study, 3/4 of the participants made direct reference to applying the critique process to their own work as a direct result of the sessions. Indeed, it has been argued that when reviewing the work of others, students invariably make comparative evaluations with their own and consider ways of improving it. In developing the capability of making evaluative judgment, students need to be able to discern quality, what is good and not good, and to identify this in the work they produce themselves. This process is evidenced in the latter response, which indicates the student making self-critical reflections in the context of quality. Increased levels of self-critique are an integral part of developing autonomy and creative initiative, skills that are increasingly important in an uncertain and more rapidly evolving employment landscape. An important facet of a cooperative learning context is trust between all participants. This was present during the reviews, as this participant identifies. Although the students involved in these reviews were briefed on the nature of feedback to be provided, the module's assessment criteria were not deployed to structure their evaluations. Some suggest that students comparing work to criteria and standards leads to a better understanding of quality, and that with a more explicit focus on evaluative judgment, students can pay closer attention to what constitutes quality in others' work. Conversely, others question whether the process of developing students' own internal concepts of quality are enhanced more when they are not given pre-formulated criteria, but where they emerge through the appraisals. Furthermore, Sadler cautions that focusing on criteria encourages students to think about particularities within the work, as opposed to the overall quality. Students often ask to see examples of design coursework, not least so that they can gain an understanding of what they're being asked to produce. The use of exemplars, which can include previous submissions or examples of analogous work such as precedents, is particularly suited to creative programs. Whereas examples of an essay would need to be read in advance, in-class discussion around images and models can be facilitated much more expediently. However, there are potential challenges involved with using exemplars, which include facilitating deep as opposed to superficial engagement, and the impact of student-tutor power dynamics on the development of evaluative judgment capabilities. In recent years, as module leader of the Level 5 architecture cohort, I provided students with examples of previous submissions for their first semester design projects. These were uploaded onto the virtual learning environment at the start of term so that students could refer to them at any time. Their presence was highlighted to the students. However, that was the extent of discussion about them. This year, however, I used a combination of lectures and studio workshops, which occurred approximately halfway through the coursework, to discuss the exemplars at length, and I included numerous examples for each submission component. This introduces the students to standards and dimensions of quality associated with the coursework, as well as assessment criteria, which is a key aspect of developing evaluative judgment. The module surveys at this institution ask students to evaluate their coursework using similar questions to those in the National Student Survey, which is an independent evaluation that all final year students in the UK are asked to complete. The NSS consistently shows that students across all disciplines are least satisfied with questions relating to assessment. Furthermore, satisfaction is lower than average in architecture programs. Strikingly, however, when the discussions around exemplars have been employed, the question of whether marking criteria had been made clear scored joint top in the evaluation survey, along with the question of how well staff explain things. The margin of lead over the next question was considerable, 10% agree or strongly agree. In comparative terms, where the exemplars have been used to discuss quality, the score for whether marking criteria had been made clear was 87% agree or strongly agree. In sharp contrast, the same question in the most recent NSS for this programme where exemplars had not been employed or discussed in this way, was 63%. Although no direct correlation can be proven, this increase in students' awareness of the methods and criteria used to assess their work implies a corresponding increase in their understanding of the means through which their tutors undertake evaluative judgment of their work. Disappointingly, however, analysis revealed that the mean module component marks between the year where exemplars were extensively discussed showed no increase in student attainment over the previous year. When choosing exemplars, one decision is whether to present a range of submissions that introduce students to different benchmark thresholds or to select only stronger ones. In this study, the examples of previous work were all graded 65% or above. Some research proposes choosing exemplars to demonstrate a range of quality. Others argue that it will be more beneficial to choose exemplars that stimulate conversations around issues of quality, as opposed to standalone examples of differing quality, and that multiple exemplars may be useful in demonstrating the variety of possible responses and the contingent nature of evaluative judgment. This will be particularly pertinent to subjective disciplines such as creative programs. Sadler proposes that the minimum number of exemplars should relate to the number of criteria being used, as this influences the number of ways in which quality can be constructed, but that more than one is required to appreciate that quality can be realised in different ways. Another consideration is when to introduce exemplars to the students. Carlos et al. Reversed the dominant trend in the exemplars literature by suggesting that students commence their own work before analysing exemplars. The rationale being that students may be more cognitively engaged and ready to develop evaluative judgment skills through being able to compare their own evolving work with the exemplars. Tutors may have concern that showing examples of previous work or precedents will inhibit students' own creative exploration. Introducing exemplars after they've started work on their task may reduce the tendency for them to adopt surface-level imitation of the exemplar. In this study, the exemplars were uploaded to the VLE right at the start of the module, but were only discussed with the students around the midway point. There will need to be some commentary about the exemplars for students to use them to full advantage in developing their evaluative judgment. However, there needs to be a careful balance between students' active participation in identifying quality in samples of work and the descriptions of quality given by the tutor. It has been argued that educators should be concerned with determining the quality of students' evaluative judgment. This could be achieved through reflecting on the qualities of judgments made and the thought processes and justifications used. This would have the effect of turning an implicit aspect of the curriculum into an explicit one that is evaluated itself, if not assessed. However, evaluating this process could prove challenging. Dawson suggests that articulating the ways in which experts make evaluative judgments may be very difficult, but this does not mean that it should not be attempted. For example, it has been suggested that illusions of competence may mean that students most in need of rectifying misalignment between evaluative judgment of their work and its actual quality are those least likely to recognise it. For peer design reviews, one approach would be for the tutor facilitating the session to appraise each student's contributions to the process. This can be captured on a rubric, and the tutor provide feedback to each student on the quality of their evaluative judgment of their peers. Another approach will be for the student being reviewed to appraise the feedback from their peers. Arguably, however, it will be challenging for students to meaningfully appraise the verbal feedback they are receiving in the forum of an open discussion. In fact, the verbal delivery in peer design reviews is likely to be a valuable feature in nurturing evaluative judgment. Vandenberg et al. found that oral as opposed to written feedback facilitated peers' explanations of their judgments, and students' interactions more often assumed an evaluative mode. Students could be asked to submit their own evaluation of exemplars. This could take place in class, with the exemplars exhibited in a studio session or in a lecture, or the exemplars could be presented on the VLE and then evaluated by the students during self-directed study. The tutor can then assess the scope and quality of the students' evaluative feedback, or the extent to which the students demonstrate the capability to articulate and defend their judgments. A significant advantage to this approach is that the students mirror the assessment method followed by their tutors, thus increasing their understanding of what they often perceive as an opaque and ambiguous process. This would especially be the case where students are evaluating exemplars using the criteria which they in turn will be assessed against. 30 years ago, Roy Sadler argued that not engaging students in authentic evaluative experiences effectively creates a performance ceiling for many, or places limits on their learning. Furthermore, higher education must equip learners not just for what they need to be able to do on their course, but for the multiplicity of challenges they will face after graduation. Nurturing evaluative judgment should be an explicit learning objective in this context. Students need participative experience in making judgments, interrogating and discussing them, which is why simply showing exemplars or providing them on a VLE is inadequate. They should have repeated opportunities to be active participants in the formulation of critical judgments. It is therefore important that events such as peer review and discussions around exemplars are not one-off activities. There are advantages and disadvantages, as well as similarities and differences, to both methods presented here. In both peer review and appraising exemplars of previous submissions, the students are evaluating the work of someone else, as well as comparing that performance with their own. However, exemplars have usually been produced by someone outside the immediate learning context, and so the process lacks the additional benefit of the creator receiving the feedback, as occurs in peer review. In peer review, however, standards of quality in the work being discussed cannot be controlled or benchmarked in the way that they can with exemplars which are chosen by tutors. But, then again, exposing students to a range of quality can benefit their understanding of standards. Whereas exemplars need careful consideration of the student-tutor power dynamic when discussing quality, peer review fundamentally upsets the power relation. By immersing students in the process of formulating feedback, peer review engages them in critical judgments about the work of others. They experience the process for themselves, as opposed to it just being described. This has implications for how exemplars are used. It must be a participatory experience, and not one in which the tutor identifies what is good and what is bad about them. Liu and Carlos argue that students should analyse illustrative exemplars to clarify notions of quality, which themselves can include work of their peers. Therefore, peer review is just one format to facilitate this. So, although this presentation discusses two different means of nurturing evaluative judgment in design students, these should not be considered as two unrelated approaches. As Sadler highlights to us, exemplars, in whatever format they take, convey messages that nothing else can. Thank you for listening to this presentation.